Testing, 1, 2. Can everyone hear me?
And can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bill of Rights Institute AP Prep webinar. This is our 5th webinar in the series, and we're so glad you could make it tonight. So just a little bit of housekeeping. This seminar will last 1 hour. Our esteemed Tom Richey will be leading us through this night's program. If you want to ask a specific content question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom. And if you want to just talk about what you're hearing or introduce each other, please, please use our chat box. So without any further ado, I turn it over to Mr. Tom Richey for tonight's AP Prep webinar.
Okay, yes, okay. Sorry about that. Needed to unmute. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, so let me try this again. Tom Richey here, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight as we look at a very important topic. It's a Friday night webinar, so, not quite as many people here, but this will give you more time to ask questions, for me to answer them, and also for other people to see the archive of this webinar. And we will be looking at 4 more webinars next week as we look at the late 19th and then go into the 20th century. All right, so we've got lots of people here. We've got Micah and Jason and Buddy Richey. It looks like Raj is here. Okay, so great to see everybody. All right, so let's go ahead and start looking at some of the causes of the Civil War. All right, so lots of stuff we can do here. I'm going to probably get y'all to y'all to kind of give me some input here because there are a lot of things that we could emphasize, but I'm going to go ahead and get right to it, and we'll see where we go from there. All right. Lots of great people here. No, Raj, I'm still not going to prom with you, but, it is certainly flattering that you keep asking every night, and it's good to see everybody. I did the nullification crisis last night, so go ahead and look at webinar 4, and you'll be able to see me go through the nullification crisis in quite a bit of detail. Okay, so let's go ahead and share my screen, and remember, we won't be able to hit everything, okay? It's just there's so much there that we are going to emphasize some things here. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take a quick look at the Mexican War and the Compromise of 1850, and that is really kind of a turning point here because last time we were talking about nullification, the early antebellum period, and really this culture of compromise that existed between the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. So this period between 1820 and 1850 is dominated by the 1812 generation, really this like second generation of American political leaders, Webster, Clay, Calhoun. These were people who were very committed to the compromises. We were talking the other night about the compromises that produced the Constitution. And so when South Carolina started doing its nullification thing, Clay closed that out with a compromise. Now, things are going to change, though, as really with the expansion to the west, okay? So this cannot be understated here as far as the westward expansion of the United States being a major cause of the American Civil War. And really, the Mexican War is what is going to start this chaos that leads to the Civil War, kind of like in a similar situation as the French and Indian War is going to lead to the American Revolution. So let's take a quick look at the Mexican War and the Compromise of 1850. And so this, now we should recognize this by now. This is American Progress, an 1872 painting that is often used to really underscore this concept of manifest destiny, that the United States is somehow divinely ordained to, go from sea to shining sea, so to speak. And so we've got the telegraph wires, choo-choo trains, ships, stagecoaches, farmers, pioneers, the Pony Express, and then you've got all of this out here. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on Monday night. So as far as this goes, white America is expanding and, achieving its manifest destiny, as they saw that at the time. And in 1845, Texas was annexed by a joint resolution of Congress. One thing that's key to understanding is that in the 1830s, there was this culture of compromise, and nobody wanted to start any trouble. Texas had gained its independence in the 1830s, and the United States is like, no thanks, we're not going to start this argument. Now, James K. Polk gets elected on this manifest destiny westward expansion ticket. And so before he even takes office, John Tyler, with the help of John C. Calhoun, his Secretary of State, brings Texas into the Union. So before Polk even takes office, Texas is in the Union. And now Texas, and this is always an interesting discussion to have when you're talking about the legality of secession, that this territory here in pink is disputed territory, that Texas says that it's part of Texas, Mexico says that it's part of Mexico. And the United States recognized Texas version of this border, not Mexico's, okay? So we've got disputed territory here. And then also you've got this bear flag republic. Now, you notice on the California flag, you've got the Lone Star, which, started with this bonnie blue flag during the West Florida Rebellion. And we see that Texas has this Lone Star on their flag. California has this Lone Star on their flag. So a lot of people are, trying to bring this area, make it independent, but then also put another star on the flag of the United States. And so here is more land that the United States wants. And, we've got these bear flaggers out here that have started their little so-called republic out in California. So, you've got the Mexican War. And this is what happens when General Zachary Taylor is out there, is fired upon, and all of that. So we go to war with Mexico, and long story short, this is a, pretty quick war, in some ways kind of like the Spanish-American War, just a very one-sided kind of war here. You see U.S. troops in Mexico City, and a win for the United States. And so win for the United States, and then we will, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we'll take half your country. And, so basically the United States, in a matter of a few years, has, between Texas and the Mexican cession, has taken a great deal of what used to be Mexico. And with that comes, new conflicts, because the slavery issue had already been settled in the Louisiana Purchase by the Missouri Compromise. And so as far as that goes, and if things get too orderly, they get boring, but if they get too chaotic, then it gets to be a mess. And that's what you're really seeing here, because there's going to be a big debate over this Mexican cession. Now, there's the Gadsden Purchase. I don't know if any of y'all seen that Jimmy Fallon bit, but it's really funny. If you type in Jimmy Fallon Gadsden Purchase on YouTube, it's pretty hilarious. And the point here was to bring in a Southern Transcontinental Railroad, which, of course, that was also part of the justification for the KansasNebraska Act that's going to be passed just a little bit later. Now, this is Mexico as it was before the United States got a hold of it. Absolute Vodka thought that they were going to make make an ad a few years back, and that just didn't go over that well. It, caused a bit of controversy. They ended up pulling it. And so as far as westward expansion, just reminding us that we've got the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. All right, so we got the Louisiana Purchase, and then we don't really see much else until until the 1840s. And what you see here, so you've got in 1845 the Republic of Texas, and then you've got Mexico and the disputed land. Now, of course, we bring in Texas, and then we've got the Mexican cession, this unorganized territory. So what do we do with this? All right. And so what we need to understand is the rise of free soil. And this is very, very key to understanding the causes of the Civil War, because the abolitionists, they believed that, that slavery needs to be gotten rid of immediately and everywhere. Now, the thing is that, of course, we thoroughly believe that slavery is wrong and reprehensible and all of that. But for these people, it was part of life. Now, in the North, it was part of somebody else's life, and if it stays that way, that's fine. Just like today, I don't want to go to a factory where my clothes are made or where they make my cell phone. I don't really want to know. It's just, that's kind of uncomfortable. And, so just don't tell me, and I'll buy clothes and my cell phone and all that kind of stuff as long as I don't have to see it. And so the Free Soil movement was an anti-slavery movement that was not about being against slavery in the abstract, but about limiting the expansion of slavery into the Western territories and keeping it away from, what people moving west, they thought this is going to be a place for free white farmers, for free white laborers, and not to have to compete. And so now this is not unlike the Truman Doctrine. If you think about this during the Cold War, where Harry Truman says that we are going to, contain communism, that we are not going to allow it to spread, but then we're not going to try to eradicate it either. That free soilers, such as Abraham Lincoln in the 1850s, they did not want slavery to spread, and they're committed to being against the spread of slavery. Now, what's important here is when we talk about this, we need to keep in mind that, let's see, what was I saying here? I lost my train of thought exactly. It is Friday evening. Sorry about that. But as far as that goes, that free soil is about stopping the westward expansion of slavery, whereas abolitionism is getting rid of slavery everywhere and now. Now, abolitionism is based on morality, that it is wrong, that it's against God. And then free soil is more racist and economic. These people, want a white West, so to speak. And that's what they're, so it's not as much a morality play as a play on, self-interest and what people are thinking about not wanting to be around it. And so the Wilmot Proviso, now, yeah, this is where I was going when I lost my train of thought. Now, keep in mind that this is going to upset the balance, upset the apple cart, as far as, remember that before the Mexican War, there'd been this whole thing where we admit a free state, we admit a slave state, we admit a free state, we admit a slave state. And so that way the free states and the slave states are roughly equal so that they maintain a balance in the Senate. Now realize that free soil is no more slave states. All right, so that's done. And that's going to, start this chain of events that's going to lead to the Civil War and all the conflicts there. So the Wilmot Proviso. Now, this was submitted by David Wilmot, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, the Wilmot Proviso said that any land taken from Mexico was not going to be open to slavery, okay? And so the thing is, the Wilmot Proviso never passed, but it's still important because it's really kind of a rallying cry for people who are against the spread of slavery and saying that, slavery is not, the spread of slavery is not going to be tolerated. That is free soil. And so with that, that's the Wilmot Proviso. And then in 1848, Zachary Taylor is elected president. The Whigs get their president. Now, the Whigs, remember, they were not the dominant party during this time. The Whigs elected two presidents, and they were both war heroes, and they both died in their term, William Henry Harrison and Zachary Taylor. But now, as far as that goes, the Whigs win this election. It's the last election that they're going to successfully contest. And so the Mexican war hero becomes president. And then, of course, Millard Fillmore. Now, I'm kind of going through these quickly because, who's president whatever time isn't something that figures highly on the exam unless we're talking about one of those really important presidents, all right? So what are we going to do with the Mexican cession? And so that's the Compromise of 1850. Now, make sure you got your notes ready to go because we want to make sure that we have this, because if you don't know these things, it's going to be easy for the exam to trip you up. So first of all, California, the settlers in California petitioned to admit California as a free state. Now, California's big, and there were a lot of Southern congressmen who are thinking, well, why can't this be divided between a slave state and a free state? And so as far as that goes, a lot of people aren't going to vote for this. And so Henry Clay, excuse me. Yeah, Henry Clay and Stephen Douglas, they put together this package, okay? So how can we get California in? Well, what we can do is we can reach out to some of the some of the congressmen from the upper South, okay, so from Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, maybe we can get their votes with a stronger fugitive slave law. Now, if you're in Georgia or Alabama, you probably don't care about a fugitive slave law. But the states that were very close to the free states, remember that Frederick Douglass was a slave in Maryland and ran off, okay? These slaves, once they got into free territory, they tended to be okay because the laws were not being enforced by these states. Now, the original fugitive slave law put it in the hands of the states to recover these slaves. Now, the northern states, a lot of them were deciding, no, we don't want to do this. So, the southern states, a lot of them said, well, maybe the federal government needs to take this over. And so as far as that goes, the stronger fugitive slave law puts it in the hands of the federal government. Then, what are we going to do about slavery in these Mexican cession territories? Well, you've got popular sovereignty, which was a doctrine come up with by Lewis Cass, and more notably, Stephen Douglas becomes associated with this doctrine of popular sovereignty to let settlers decide what is going to be the status of slavery in the Mexican cession. And so then Texas. Now, we saw how Texas came into the Union. It went all the way to Santa Fe. So how does the federal government get states to do stuff? It offers them money, okay? Same thing as far as, why is the drinking age 21 in every state when it used to be 18 in a lot of states? Well, the federal government says, well, if your drinking age is under 21, you're going to surrender some of your highway funds. And so the federal government has a long history of giving, money to the states in order for getting the states to do what it wants. And so Texas ceded land in return for $10 million from the federal government to pay war debt. And so now Texas is smaller Texas. And if you think about this, somebody who didn't want to have slavery in this Mexican cession, well, they may not want to vote for this popular sovereignty, but you know what? If this slave state's going to give up some land, maybe I can support part of this package. And then while they're at it, it's kind of like when you're having an argument with a friend and you think like, you know what, while we've got all this out there, let's put everything out there. And so finally, you've got this issue of slavery in Washington, D.C. and the compromise they come up with there, because Southern congressmen, they would bring their body men, okay, the person who, gets them dressed in the morning, does their laundry, makes sure they have the paper, and all of these things that they do for them. So what they do here is the Southern congressmen can still bring their slaves into Washington, D.C., but there will be no more slave trade, this was especially embarrassing to people who were not fans of slavery, because foreign diplomats would come to Washington, D.C., and they'd see all of these slaves being traded. So this was a way to compromise on that particular issue. And so as far as the Compromise of 1850, for the North, you're admitting California as a free state. For the South, a stronger fugitive slave law. Now, if you're trying to make a 3 on the exam, knowing this may be enough, okay? But I think for those of you who are trying to make a 5, which if you're watching this on a Friday night, that may be you, the New Mexico territory, popular sovereignty in the Mexican cession, and in return for that, the federal government assumes the Texas debt, and Texas cedes the western land to the New Mexico territory. And finally, in Washington, D.C., they're abolishing the slave trade. So the Compromise of 1850 is something that is very important to remember. Now, this is what it looked like before. There's Big Texas, and there's the Mexican cession, and then this is what it looked like afterward, where they create these New Mexico and Utah territories. Now, as far as that goes, of course, Clay was for the Compromise of 1850. Daniel Webster, who was from Massachusetts, if we want to think about point of view, ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Webster, a retiring senator from Massachusetts, almost dying. All 3 of these guys, you can tell they're all on the verge of death. But Daniel Webster stood up and he said, I'm not here to speak as a Massachusetts man or a Northern man. I want to speak as an American. And Daniel Webster, a lawyer, now somebody who was not friendly to slavery. Webster, in fact, in the Hayne-Webster debates had talked about how, Ohio's economy from the way he saw it, was doing better than Kentucky, that the free states are actually doing better than the slave states as far as he saw in the 1830s. But Daniel Webster from Massachusetts said that when it came to the fugitive slave issue, that the South was right, the North was wrong. The way that he saw this, the Constitution is a legal agreement, and if it's going to work, that everybody's got to fulfill their obligations. Now, this is the point of view of that 1812 generation, this nationalistic generation. Remember when Calhoun and Clay were much younger, and they were war hawks together. Now, John C. Calhoun said, you know what, this compromise, he says, this is not the first compromise the South has ever made. It won't be the last. He said the South, if they compromise here, they'll be called upon to compromise and compromise and compromise. And he said, if this thing goes through, I see us having a war or a separation of the sections within about 10 years. Okay, wow. Okay, I mean, Calhoun, say a lot of things about Calhoun. You know, there are a lot of things we can say about him, but the guy wasn't stupid. I mean, it's like almost like the guy's having a prophetic utterance right before he dies. But Calhoun did oppose it, and, you know, he was trying to rally, when, you know, as he was dying, he was trying to rally the South to put up this kind of last stand, which I guess they'll, you know, do in a way a little bit later. And so remember the role of Stephen Douglas. Henry Clay was the guy that kind of put his name on this thing, but Stephen Douglas really did all the work because they couldn't get a big bill passed. They had to pass separate bills to get this compromise passed. So they've averted the crisis. You can relax now. But at the same time, not quite, okay, because this is going to be a rough decade. In 1850, you're compromising. In 1860, you're going to be shooting at each other. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, with that in mind, remember I have a website, and so does the Bill of Rights Institute. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, so as far as that goes, you know, if you've got questions or anything like that, yes, Rachel is noting that we've got a Q&A session, a Q&A section, and I will be going into, I would presume that y'all want to get into that timeline of events leading to the Civil War. Is that the case? All right, so let me just kind of make sure there that we don't have any questions about what's already happened, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the next presentation. All right, like the movie. Okay, I hope that's not. Oh my goodness, let's keep it G-rated, people. This is an academic environment. All right, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, I've got this opened up here, and it looks like here we can just go ahead. All right, so Kansas, Nebraska. Okay, all right, Raj, I will be getting on this. So it sounds like, what about Bleeding Kansas? Raj and Rachel, let's go ahead then and push on in the 1850s and Bleeding Kansas. Now, we may not get, you know, like I said, we're not going to get everything done, but we're going to get done the things that are important to y'all. So if y'all want me to go ahead and take on that, I will go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and get into the road to Civil War and going over these things that are, you know, so important to, you know, these main events that are leading to the Civil War. And I'm going to go through this rather quickly. I've got a similar lecture on my YouTube channel if you want something where I'm going a little more slowly and leisurely. We are kind of in review mode. So as far as the road to Civil War going from 1850 to 1860, all right, so the Compromise of 1850, all right, we've got that. Now I need to fix this. Sorry about that. There's something with the font that for some reason sometimes does puts the quotation marks there, and I need to see what happened. All right, so Uncle Tom's Cabin is published, okay, in 1852. Uncle Tom's Cabin. All right, let's see. That's bothering me. Okay, there we go. For right now, we'll just let that be there. All right. So Uncle Tom's Cabin is published in 1852, then the KansasNebraska Act, and then the Brooks-Sumner incident in 1856. So we've been over the Compromise of 1850. We know what's all in there. And so we see here that the crisis is not quite averted. Now, Henry Clay thought this is going to be the final compromise between the sections. And meanwhile, it was, but just for different reasons than Clay had intended. And so what you're going to see here is, first of all, now remember, the stronger Fugitive Slave Law, this is very key, this was the most controversial part of the Compromise of 1850 because a lot of Northerners objected to this on the basis of it created a bench trial. So if somebody was put on trial for being a slave, they got a bench trial when the Constitution guarantees a jury trial. So what's going on here? And so what happened here is that northern states, such as Wisconsin and some others, they passed these personal liberty laws. Now, the personal liberty laws were passed by these states in order to guarantee jury trials for accused slaves. Now, again, here's that, last night we were talking about the states' rights mole that comes up and you're just trying to whack it. There's that states' rights mole again, okay? So it just comes up, and because really, what are we talking about here? Now, this isn't like South Carolina where it's like we're nullifying the Fugitive Slave Law, but this is what is called de facto nullification, not nullification de jure or de jure, I forget, I'm not a lawyer, okay? But not nullification by law, but nullification in fact, okay? So what it does here is it nullifies a provision of federal law without formally nullifying it. So we see that Wisconsin is asserting their right to protect people in their states by the guarantees of the Constitution when the federal government is violating those. Now then, there's UncleToms Cabin, which was published in 1852. Now this is Harriet Beecher Stowe who wrote this book, and Abraham Lincoln told her something like, when he met her, that here's the little woman who started this war. All right, and so as far as that goes, UncleToms Cabin. Now, never underestimate the power of fiction, okay, that books cause us to rethink. The Twilight series, before that kind of stuff came out, before you had Twilight and Vampire Diaries, it's like when I was growing up, people thought like of vampires, they thought like Dracula. If you see a vampire, run. Not that it'll help you because vampires are fast. But the thing is now, when somebody sees a vampire, it's like, is that one of the good vampires? Oh, he's so cute. Like, maybe he's one of the vegetarians or something. Maybe he just eats animals. And it's like, books cause us to rethink, okay? It's like, I don't want my daughter anywhere near a vampire, but because of these books, like, people think like vampires are okay. And it changes your mind. And UncleToms Cabin is a lot like that. It's changing people's views about slavery. Now, Uncle Tom is, you see here the personification of subservience, okay? So Uncle Tom is there, and notice his stooped posture, that he is very, very submissive. And, which if any of you've seen that movie, Django Unchained, Samuel L. Jackson's character is modeled after. You can see where, he looks just like this Uncle Tom. And this has survived as an insult in some circles. Somebody is being subservient, somebody is forgetting who they are, so to speak. Not a very nice thing to say about someone, but it's said nonetheless. Now, the 1852 presidential election, whoa, bye-bye, Whig Party. All right, they did not do very well in that. They did okay, I guess, in the popular vote, but as far as the electoral vote, they got crushed. A couple of New England states, and then Tennessee and Kentucky. Well, that's going to be the last election the Whigs compete in. Franklin Pierce is elected, which, I tell you what, the guy had some great hair. They called him Handsome Frank was his nickname. I'm not sure where my Handsome Frank bobblehead is. The New Hampshire Historical Society was so proud of their only president from New Hampshire that, they've got a bobblehead, and I need to figure out where I have it. But Franklin Pierce, the 14th president of the United States from 1853 to 57. Now, Franklin Pierce is what you would call a doughface. These were northern politicians with Southern agenda. So, the 8 of the first 12 presidents of the United States were from the South. And so it's not politically viable anymore at this point to run somebody from the South. But if the Democrats can run a Northerner who's friendly to Southern interests, then they can get the same thing done. And so as far as this goes, remember that the Free Soilers, they want to keep slavery out of the Western territories. Now, the Southerners, the Southern politicians here are wanting to expand slavery into the Western territories. Now, when you look at a map of the United States, what you're thinking about when you take a look at that is that, the South kind of sees that at some point, if we go back here, it's like if you fill all of this with free states, then eventually the South could get in a position where the free states could amend the Constitution or something like that. And so there's a lot of paranoia that develops here, on the part of Southerners about the future of slavery. And then the Free Soilers, there's paranoia that, this is going to become a nationwide kind of thing. And here is, again, remember that visual sources, we want to look at details and such. Now, the objective of the Free Soilers, as I typically put it, is a white West. Now, when you look here, that here is forcing slavery down the throat of a Free Soiler. Now, this man here is this farmer who is being depicted here, and there are these Democratic politicians that are, holding him down. Now, notice here, this is the Democratic platform, okay? So now a platform is the collection of issues by which a party, that a party runs on. So, today, Republicans, part of the Republican platform is, tough on immigration, lower taxes, and, pro-life, whereas the Democratic platform is pro-choice, that some people need to pay higher taxes if they're in the upper tax brackets, and that immigrants need to be welcomed, and there doesn't need to be a border wall. So, each of those parties has a platform. So what we see here, Kansas, spread slavery to Kansas, then to Cuba and Central America. There were things, some of you trying to make a five may be familiar with the Austin Manifesto, where, they want to bring Cuba possibly into the United States in order to have another slave state. Now, this guy here, murder, help, neighbors, help. Oh, my poor wife and children, and this guy's a victim because this Democratic politician is trying to shove a black man down his throat. I presume that this is Stephen Douglas, would be my presumption here. So that is a Free Soil cartoon, and it is the white farmer who is the victim, not the black slave, okay? So important to know that distinction. Now, the KansasNebraska Act, y'all were talking about this. This was passed in 1854, and this basically made popular sovereignty, which had been applied without a lot of controversy out in the West, because, it's just a big old desert, but they thought, you know what, let's try it out here. Now, notice that Kansas and Nebraska are in the Missouri, what used to be covered by the Missouri Compromise and the Louisiana Purchase. And so now the settlers in Kansas and Nebraska territories would decide the status of slavery, even though these territories are north of 3630. And so now it is kind of a free-for-all out here. And this is going to add, as I was talking about, that this chaos that is leading to the Civil War. And, we like to simplify the Civil War, at least in pop culture. They like to simplify it, to make the Civil War as simple as possible. And, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of nuance. Of course, the central issue here, does appear to be slavery. But it is specifically about these, these deals that have been made now have been broken, and nobody really can count on anything. And so now people are going to try to get as much as they can there. So the Missouri Compromise is basically, superseded by this legislation. And Senator Stephen Douglas, Douglas, the author of the KansasNebraska Act, was a Northern Democrat from Illinois with presidential aspirations. It's kind of like today, a Republican is not going to win the presidency if they can't win in the South. Now, at that time, the South was the stronghold of the Democratic Party. And so if Stephen Douglas wants to be president, then he has to be popular in the South. And so Bleeding Kansas, this is what starts over here as far as, when all of these people start rushing in. So on one hand, you've got these border ruffians, these pro-slavery settlers from Missouri. And then you have anti-slavery settlers from New England and other places, but it's out here in New England, which is the hottest bed of abolitionism, where, you see that they are raising money for these people to go settle out in Kansas. And so between 1855 and 1859, 56 people are killed in Kansas. Now, Beechers Bible, this is an interesting little thing here, that there was Henry Ward Beecher. Now, Beecher was a preacher, Beecher was a preacher. I get it. All right. So as far as this goes, Beecher believed that the Sharp's rifle was a truly moral agency, and that there was more power in one of those instruments so far as the slaveholders of Kansas were concerned than in 100 Bibles. You might just as well read the Bible to buffaloes as to pro-slavery settlers, but they have a supreme respect for the logic that is embodied in Sharp's rifle. And so the sack of Lawrence in Kansas, now this is the type of thing that would happen. Mr. Beat was just in Lawrence, Kansas, Mr. Beat's Social Studies channel, and he was recording something out there. I can't wait to see what he's come up with. And so the anti-slavery settlement of Lawrence was sacked by pro-slavery settlers. Now, John Brown, a radical abolitionist, and let's be careful how we cast abolitionists, because there are some abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison. A great many of abolitionists were pacifist and nonviolent. John Brown did not fit into this category. What John Brown and his sons did is they searched for, they said, okay, we're going to retaliate for the sack of Lawrence, but we're not necessarily going to go after the same people who did it. We will just find some pro-slavery settlers and we'll kill them. So they go to this homestead and they tell all the men to come out of the house. And, they spare the youngest boy because to please the mother, and the boy was very, very young. But then the rest of, that man and his sons are executed brutally, like not just shot, but they had a broadsword and they just hacked this one guy to death. And I mean, it was a pretty gruesome massacre here. But John Brown believed that he was out doing the Lord's work. And this is a very interesting little painting here. Now, this brings us to the New Deal, okay? So this guy, he was hired by the government in order to create a mural for the Kansas State House. And so what he did here is, created this mural with John Brown in the middle, and you've got the Civil War going on, fires, tornadoes, the pioneers passing through because who wants to stay here? You've got these soldiers here. John Brown, I always say, he's got a Bible in one hand and a Bible in the other hand, okay, just a Beechers Bible in the other hand. And so as far as that goes, I don't think they were too glad to see it. It'd almost be like if somebody said we need something for the South Carolina legislature and somebody made a mural of slavery or something like that, the things that the state's probably not all that proud of. And so as far as that goes, that's what's going on in Kansas. And so you've got, on top of everything else, the chaos of conflicting constitutions. The Topeka Constitution was an anti-slavery constitution, whereas the Lecompton Constitution was pro-slavery. And so these two constitutions are submitted. Now, the Senate prefers the Lecompton Constitution, and the House prefers the Topeka Constitution. And it wasn't until the Civil War started and after secession that the Topeka Constitution is the one that's accepted by everyone. All right, and let's just take a quick moment, ladies and gentlemen, to remember our dear friend, Harambe. And while we do that, we want to remember not only did Harambe die, but the Kansas issue really is the end of the not the Democratic Party, but the Whig Party, okay? So after the Whig Party lost in 1852, the KansasNebraska Act was really the last nail in the coffin here. So as far as that, you got the demise of the Whig Party. And this, causes the rise of the Republican Party, founded in 1854, which was a sectional party, all right? Now, its platform was free soil. It was not an abolitionist party, although it would have had abolitionists in it, kind of like, today if somebody identifies as Tea Party, they, are probably Republican, but not every Republican identifies with the Tea Party. It's a faction within the Republican Party. And so we go now to the Brooks-Sumner incident, okay? Now, Senator Charles Sumner, now this is this third generation of Americans that's really coming around, and that Charles Sumner actually had the same, seat as Daniel Webster. And Daniel Webster in 1850 had said, you know what, we need to all, I'm not a big fan of slavery, but we all need to live together. Daniel Webster said that the abolitionists, he said they were well-meaning, they were good people, but according to Webster, they were making things worse, okay, because I always tell folks, I said last night, when you tell a Southerner they're wrong about something, they just became more right. Even if they were like kind of thinking about, you know what, this is probably kind of wrong. Once somebody tells them they're wrong, that's over. Which I think that applies to anybody to some extent, but especially Southerners. So what happens is Charles Sumner, he gives this speech, The Crime Against Kansas. Now, I tell people that, you know, and of course I'm from the South, so it's a little bit different perhaps. But as far as that goes, let me make sure I've got a call coming in, it looks like, but yeah, but hopefully y'all can still hear me. Let me just make sure that's not causing a problem. And let's see here. All right. Yes. Thank you, buddy. Thank you, buddy. R.I.P. Well, Kinsey, come on now. Let's be respectful here. All right. So as far as this goes, ladies and gentlemen, that the Brooks-Sumner incident, I say that there are two types of people. Oh, is the video going? Or you can still see me? All right. Okay, so you can still see. Can y'all still see me? Okay, I'll put the slides back up. Okay, but the thing is, now keep in mind I'm from South Carolina. I may have a little point of view bias or something like that. But I always say that there are two types of people. There are people who have read the speech and people who haven't. Okay, the Brooks-Sumner incident, like you see, like a guy just came in there and just beat a guy up with a cane. There's a little bit more than that. Okay, so let me bring the slides up here. Okay. And so as far as what's going on here, and this is a very polarizing incident, but Charles Sumner, he gives this speech and he compares Andrew Butler of South Carolina, senator from South Carolina, Don Quixote, which in that story, the knight who's chasing windmills and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And so, you know, then he says that Stephen Douglas from Illinois is Sancho Panza, which he's kind of making a play on Stephen Douglas's, you know, height and weight, because Sancho Panza's a short, fat guy. And so he's like, basically, Stephen Douglas is just tagging along with Andrew Butler. Andrew Butler was not in the Senate chamber. I think he was ill, but he wasn't in the Senate chamber, and that was a big faux pas, because you're not supposed to speak about people in the Senate who are not there. And so basically this upstart, which, you know, if you think about today, like somebody like, you know, Senator Ted Cruz, like a first-term senator who has ended up commanding a great deal of attention and known for antics that tend to kind of tick off other people that are in the Senate with him. And so Charles Sumner gives this speech, and really it's a philippic. This is a type of speech that is delivered against a political actor. So it's all kinds of like ad hominem attacks. And, you know, he said here that basically that, you know, Andrew Butler is the Don Quixote of slavery. And then, you know, Stephen Douglas is the Sancho Panza of slavery. And he says here, the senator from South Carolina has read many books on chivalry and believes himself a chivalrous knight with sentiments of honor and courage. Of course, he has chosen a mistress to whom he has made his vows, and who, though ugly to others, is always lovely to him. Though polluted in the sight of the world, is chaste in his sight. I mean the harlot, slavery. Were the whole history of South Carolina blotted out of existence from its very beginning, civilization might lose, I do not say how little, but surely less than it has already gained by the example of Kansas. Ah, sir, I tell the senator that Kansas, welcomed as a free state, will be a ministering angel to the republic, when South Carolina, in the cloak of darkness which she hugs, lies howling. Now, he not only gives the speech, but he publishes it. He has it printed and circulates thousands of copies. And so as far as chivalry, remember that, you know, the chivalrous man who's like, you know, buying everything and doing all these nice things, you know, it's, you know, there's more to that, okay, that this man's showing how courteous he is, but he is also showing his dominance. And if anybody tries to, you know, say anything wrong about his lady, it's on. And so basically, Preston Brooks, you know, is wondering, should I challenge this guy to a duel? And his buddy says, no, don't duel this guy. This guy's not a gentleman. You only duel gentlemen. This guy has conducted himself more like a dog. And when a dog is not behaving, you beat it. And so as far as that, which this meme's gotten a little old, but, at the time when I did this, it was kind of fresh. And so basically, Preston Brooks just goes into the Senate and just beats the mess out of him. Now, when you look at this visual source, one thing we can notice here is how, there is Charles Sumner with a pen. He looks very submissive. There are people here who are, kind of laughing. Now, this guy looks shocked, another guy laughing, another guy shocked. Look at how Preston Brooks, his face is not showing. So you can tell that this is somebody from the North who is not sympathetic. All he did was write a speech, and now he's getting the tar beat out of him. Now, as far as that goes, Preston Brooks, he said, look, that when the House censured him because he was a representative, and he says that, look, this guy, insulted my state, insulted my friend, and my blood, and he says, whatever insults my state insults me. And then he said he's not a member of the House, and he resigns. Now, he got reelected after that, but then he died. So that's the end of that. But this was a very, very polarizing kind of thing here, that Preston Brooks is vilified here, as somebody who is, somebody who's an animal, and he becomes this personification here. Now, the thing is that in the South, there were all kinds of people that sent him canes and stuff, and one of them said, hit him again. And so as far as that goes, now John Brown, it's kind of like, John Brown was a hero to some people in the North. And, then people from the South just imagined everybody as John Brown. And so as far as that goes, that Franklin Pierce was not renominated, allegedly he said there's nothing left to do but get drunk. We don't know if he actually said that or not, but it's kind of what he ended up doing for the rest of his life. Now, remember the nativism during the 1850s, okay? So the nativism during the 1850s, where, you've got these caricatures of the Irish and the German drunk running off of the ballot box. Now, also remember that the Irish were the first, substantial wave of Catholic immigration. Notice Native Americans. This is not being used to refer to American Indians. These are white Protestants who were native born here. Beware of that foreign influence, which it's interesting they're using those Russian letters when you look at the current events going on today. Now, the American Party, otherwise known as the Know-Nothings, which I hope that none of you are members of the Know-Nothing Party in a week, okay? Because, of course, you're watching these webinars, so you should be remembering some things. And this is nativism, okay? So when we talk about nativism, this is, this party that mobilized against immigrants and Catholics. Now, they were called Know-Nothings because when they were asked about their platform, they would say, I know nothing but my country, my whole country, and nothing but my country. All right, so that's what they would say, that basically that I am, I love my country. That's all I know. And so in 1856, the Republicans and the Know-Nothings are trying to replace the Whigs. The Republicans have a pretty strong showing, but it's still not enough to get them, into the White House. All right. And so as far as that goes, we see here now the Civil War wasn't a surprise to anybody. There is Millard Fillmore on the Union Rock there, and it's split. Noticing they see that it's splitting. Now the Republicans are stuck in the abolition bog, okay? So the thing is, their candidate in 1856 was too radical. They see him as being influenced by Henry Ward Beecher and the abolitionists. And then there's James Buchanan, who gets to go into the White House. Even though Buchanan only got 45% of the popular vote, it's really kind of the reverse of what's going to happen in 1860. Now, so James Buchanan goes in there. The only bachelor to occupy the White House. That won't be on the exam. But what will be on the exam is the Dred Scott decision. Now, the Dred Scott decision, the facts of the case here is Dred Scott, who was a slave, lived with his master in Illinois and the Wisconsin territory for 4 years. And he said he sued for his freedom. He said that made him a free man because he'd been in a free state and he lived in free territory. Well, the Supreme Court, which by this time was dominated by, judges appointed, from the South, then the decision here was, first of all, Dred Scott, why are you here? Because people of African descent, including Scott, could not be U.S. citizens. And then Congress can't forbid slavery in federal territories. And therefore, the already defunct Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional, okay? Sorry about this thing here. You know what? Let me pull up my other version here, and that is my portable version. And I don't think that's going to have any of those things there. There we go. There we go. All right. Very, very good. Sorry about that. I hope you forgive me, everybody, for showing you that that error on that. All right. So Congress can't forbid. Now, also, not only can people of African descent not be U.S. citizens, which, of course, is never found anywhere in the Constitution, but Congress can't forbid slavery in federal territories. So, ergo, the already defunct Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional. Now, judicial activism, you want to note this for life and when you, when you get out, when you take AP government, that judicial activism is when judges basically write laws. When you look at Dred Scott, you've got an example here of judicial activism because it says nowhere in the Constitution that citizenship is in any way tied to a person's race. But the Supreme Court just went out and decided that, black people can't be citizens. And this is the branch that is unelected, the branch that is farthest away from the people. And so a lot of people are very concerned about this very activist decision by the Supreme Court that really had no basis in the Constitution. And so what happens here is Northerners are afraid of a slave power conspiracy because what's happened here is Dred Scott effectively opened up the entire West to slavery. Now, will the entire West end up being slave territory and states? No. But there's certainly a great deal of paranoia, which, that is what's happening. That is the backdrop, the context of the Lincoln-Douglas debate is the Dred Scott decision. And so Lincoln makes this a big deal in his campaign. Basically, Stephen Douglas is campaigning for popular sovereignty, and Abraham Lincoln, the Republican, is campaigning as a free soiler. Now, Douglas won the Senate election. Now, wait, do I have election on the, oh, good, no, I need to fix that. He lost the Senate election, but it basically made him unelectable in the South, okay? So he's not going to, he's not going to win in the South, okay? So that's going to be a big deal for Stephen Douglas because, without having the South on your side, then you're not going to be elected as a Democrat. So he won the battle, but Lincoln's the one who's actually going to become president. And note how some of these Lincoln-Douglas debate memorials, Lincoln is sitting so that he doesn't tower over Stephen Douglas. All right, so as far as this goes, the House divided speech was a speech that Lincoln gave when he got the Republican nomination. Now notice that the two biggest words here are slavery and decision. So what he's saying here is that the Dred Scott decision is the Dred Scott decision, what can happen here? A house divided against itself cannot stand, Lincoln said. He said that either the United States is going to be all slave or it's going to be all free. All right. Now, what he's doing here, his purpose is to drum up, support for the Republican Party. That Lincoln's saying slavery could come here because if the Supreme Court can say that you can't ban slavery in a territory, what's to stop the Supreme Court from saying you can't ban slavery in a state? And so Lincoln, now, while it probably wasn't likely the Supreme Court would have made that decision, Lincoln is using this, in order to talk to this audience in Illinois where, a black person could not legally enter that state at the time. And so Lincoln's saying, look, if you don't support the Republican Party, then slavery's going to go everywhere. Okay. Now, does that make Lincoln an abolitionist? No. Lincoln believed that, slavery, if it was on its way out, it was going to take a long time. But the House divided speech, really, set the tone here and also, cast Lincoln in Southern eyes as somebody who was a little more radical than he probably actually was. Now, in 1859, here's John Brown again. So John Brown goes and seizes the federal arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, with the intent of arming slaves for a rebellion. Now, that's treason. You seize a federal arsenal, you want to start a rebellion, that's treason. And so he's tried, convicted, executed by the federal government. And so another thing here, kind of like Preston Brooks was seen as a hero in the South, but was vilified in the North, John Brown, now not that everybody in the South saw Preston Brooks as a hero, or that everybody in the North saw John Brown as, as a hero. But there were enough people that saw these things that, the other side, they could look at this paranoia. So the Northerners, they're thinking in terms of this slave power conspiracy. The South wants to spread slavery throughout the nation, and the North wants to destroy slavery by igniting slave revolt. So basically, to Southernize, every Northerner is John Brown. To Northerners, every Southerner is Preston Brooks. And this is the kind of paranoia that's around there for the 1860 presidential election. Now, note here that we've got 4 different parties running here, because the Democratic Party decided to have their convention in Charleston, South Carolina. They nominated Stephen Douglas, which prompted all of the Southern delegations to walk out, that they said, we will not support Stephen Douglas. He is not enough of a doughface for us. We heard the stuff he said during the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And so the Northern Democrats continued to run Douglas, who got 29% of the vote, all told. And then you've got, so you've got 29% of the vote there, and then you've got the Southern Democratic candidate, Breckinridge, who got the support of, most of the slave states, though not all. And then you've got this Constitutional Union Party. Can't we all just get along? And notice these states that are, kind of on the borderlines between, North and South, that Virginia and Tennessee will become Confederate states. Of course, then West Virginia will break off there and join the Union, and then Kentucky will stay in the Union. So these are people here, in the upper South who are hoping for some kind of compromise, which isn't going to end up happening, that the culture of compromise is dead and it's over. Now, again, you notice, like with elections, whether it's 1856 or 1860 or 1912 with the Bull Moose Party, that the 1860 presidential election, Lincoln only got 40% of the vote, but he got the lion's share of the electoral votes because he cleaned up the free states. Every single free state. Now, New Jersey, you can see a few votes went to the Democrat, but New Jersey still actually had slaves in the state in 1860. So although New Jersey typically shows up as a free state on your map, they had slaves in that state still then. Not many, but there were still some there. So besides the 3 electoral votes from New Jersey, that we see that when the free states all vote for the same candidate, they win the election. And so the South, they see that, like, whoa, like, this has never happened before. 8 of the first 12 presidents were from the South, and then the ones that weren't, were our buddies. And so now you see that Lincoln comes in there, and it's like, look, the whole spread of slavery thing is done. And then, of course, there's the paranoia that, Lincoln's somebody that is going to, try to free all the slaves and bring about racial equality and all of these things that, when you read Lincoln's pronouncements early in his presidency, he had, really little to no intention of doing. So with that, as a result of Abraham Lincoln being elected as the first Republican president, the Deep South seceded and formed the Confederate States of America, the first 7 of these states to secede. And then, of course, later on, you've got 4 more that secede, and then the Civil War starts. We're not going to wait for that whole graphic to play out. I've got a website. Now, ladies and gentlemen, wow, that was quite a run. But hopefully, like I said, I would rather not cover, everything, and actually cover some topics and hit those topics well. So hopefully that's working for us. All right, so as far as that, ladies and gentlemen, how was the Republican Party formed? As part of this fallout, the second 2-party system, remember, after 1852, the second 2-party system kind of fell apart with the KansasNebraska Act, because the Northern Whigs and the Southern Whigs, all right, they are, they have different views when it comes to slavery. And so as far as that, okay, well, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I would be more than happy to go a few minutes more. All right, so as far as that goes, that the Northern Whigs and the Southern Whigs could not agree on slavery. And so then that party fell apart. And then the Republican Party was formed by Northerners in order to appeal to the Whigs and specifically have this free soil platform now that they're not, now that they're not around, now that they don't have to worry about the Southern wing. And then the KnowNothings are also, they're trying to replace the Whig Party. And so the Republican Party basically ends up outcompeting The Know-Nothings, by 1860, the Know-Nothings had faded out, and the Republican Party, now note that with Lincoln, they moderated, okay? So it's like Lincoln, part of the reason the Republicans, even though Lincoln, no. Free soil is a position, okay? Now, there was a free soil party for a bit. There was a free soil party for a bit, but don't let that confuse you, okay? So as far as that goes, it was the Democrats and the Whigs. And when the Whig Party ceased to exist in the 1850s, the Republican Party and the Know-Nothings competed to become the successor party. And the Republicans eventually won that. And so you see that now the other thing is, remember that Lincoln was more moderate than the 1856 nominee. And so Lincoln was able to project this free soil image and, project somebody that wasn't a complete radical, but that didn't necessarily help on the South, in the South where he wasn't even on the ballot in most cases. What brought down the Whig Party, Raj? You tell me. Come on, we've said many things here. All right, so as far as that goes, what brought down the Whig Party? That was the KansasNebraska Act. Basically, the loss in 1852 and the KansasNebraska Act. All right. Now, I may consider, integrating some Civil War and Reconstruction. I might do a little bit of reorganizing. We'll see. But as far as, you're just testing me. Thank you, Raj. Now, the New York City draft riots. One thing that I've seen that I saw in the concept outline as I'm going over that, is that, there was considerable opposition to the war, really on both sides. But, in the North, you saw this manifested. Now, remember that the South was very rural, and so it's more difficult to organize opposition. But like in New York City, a very large city, there, basically, you've got these recent Irish immigrants there in New York City, and they don't want to fight a war of free slaves. They don't want to fight. They don't care about the Union. So as far as any of that stuff there, I don't have, let's see. So I have not, okay. All right. I did not have the Q&A box open. Okay. So as far as that stuff goes there. All right. The Freeport Doctrine, okay, the Freeport Doctrine, this is basically in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and you don't necessarily have to know that, basically what you would need to know for the exam is that Stephen Douglas said some things that, alienated the South, okay? Now, the Freeport Doctrine, this was, when basically Lincoln talked, got Douglas into a corner. That Lincoln figured, you know what, I'm going to get him to say something that if he doesn't alienate people in Illinois, he's going to alienate the South, okay? And so as far as that goes, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not telling you the wrong thing, okay? Yeah. So basically, that was where Stephen Douglas said, you know what, if a territory wanted to exclude slavery in violation of Dred Scott, then they can. And so that was the South's what did you say about Dred Scott? Because that was the litmus test, that basically the Southern elites were not going to support a candidate as the Democratic nominee who said that Dred Scott wasn't sacrosanct, okay? That Dred Scott, that was a big victory for the KansasNebraska Act and Dred Scott were both big victories for the South and the faction that wanted to spread slavery. All right, and so, as far as that goes, the change in political parties, their beliefs, their supporter base. Now, after the Civil War, we'll get to that later. That's a little bit, that's going to be a little bit, later on that. Okay, we answered the John Brown thing. Is it important to know specific battles of the Civil War? Now, Christine, and I may consider, because this topic is something that's a high demand topic, so we'll see what we can do next week. But as far as battles, and this is battles in any war, like Saratoga, for example, in the Revolutionary War, we don't need to necessarily know the battlefield tactics used at the Battle of Saratoga, but we would need to know that because the Battle of Saratoga, the French pledged support, okay, to the revolution. And so basically the battle at Antietam, this was something that was the bloodiest single day. It was the first time that Robert E. Lee had taken the field and been, like, not victorious, okay? And so basically, since Lee had been fought to a draw and went back into the Confederacy, then Lincoln, this is what Lincoln used to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which basically gave the South a warning that in 100 days, I'm going to make this war about slavery. And so, which had not been about slavery up to that time. And so then you think about like Gettysburg and Vicksburg, all right? So Gettysburg and Vicksburg together, those form the turning points of the American Civil War. And it's not that, not that you need to know what's going on in those battles, but understanding that those twin Union victories in the same week, that was really, this was really the first time where, it was seen that like perhaps the North can win this thing, because when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, it looked like the South, might be winning. Okay, so so we've got the time's up here, and so thank you very much. And I'm going to turn this back over to the Bill of Rights Institute, which is going to remind us about all the great resources that they've got for us. So thank y'all, and we will be back on Monday, broadcasting Monday night through Thursday night, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. All right, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Well, thank you so much, everyone who's joined us tonight. We had a great session. There are lots of questions that unfortunately couldn't get answered, but Tom will be here all next week, and we hope that you'll be able to find all the resources you need on our webinar or on our website. So if you go to Bill of Rights Institute and you click up here on Engage, you'll be able to see the AP Prep Webinars link. That's this page where every day we are uploading the session and the notes for the session. I want to thank Caroline. She noticed that session 3 needs its notes uploaded. So please let us know if you have any questions. We look forward to seeing you next week, and study up this weekend, last weekend before the test. Thank you all very much.